What if a single passport could change the course of history? What if a simple document could shake the foundations of West Africa, threaten the dominance of ECOWAS, and send shockwaves through France and the Western world? On January 29, 2025, one photograph did exactly that. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before the cameras, holding up the first ever AES biometric passport, a symbol that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger were no longer bound by ECOWAS control. At that moment, he wasn't just showing a passport. He was declaring independence, challenging the status quo, and sending a powerful message to Africa and beyond. But why does this image matter so much? Why are ECOWAS and France watching nervously? And could this passport be the first step toward a new era of African sovereignty? Here, we would like to take a moment and thank you for supporting us and being a valued part of our strong community. And if you are not yet a member, we encourage you to join us and help build an even stronger community together. Let's get started. History is shaped by moments. Some are loud like violent, wars, revolutions, assassinations. Others are quiet, yet just as powerful. A single signature, a raised fist, an act of defiance captured in a photograph. On January 29, 2025, one such moment unfolded. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the leader of Burkina Faso, stood before cameras and held up the first ever AES biometric passport. It was just a simple booklet, but at that moment, it became something much bigger. It became a symbol of independence, defiance, and a challenge to West Africa's old power structures. This was no ordinary government announcement. The image of Traoré with the AES passport sent shockwaves across Africa and beyond. It was proof that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger had broken away from ECOWAS control and were building their own identity. This wasn't just talk, this was real. For years, ECOWAS had been the dominant political and economic framework in West Africa. It was supposed to unite nations under a shared vision, but in reality, it has kept many countries trapped under foreign influence, especially France. Policies were made not to serve Africans, but to maintain the status quo of Western economic dominance. That is why this passport mattered. It wasn't just about travel, it was about self-determination. For decades, West African nations had been using passports, currencies, and banking systems designed by institutions they did not control. But now, Traoré was showing the world that Burkina Faso, along with Mali and Niger, no longer needed ECOWAS or its Western backers. The timing of this moment was no accident. The AES nations had only recently withdrawn from ECOWAS, sparking debates across the continent. Critics called the move reckless, claiming these countries would struggle without ECOWAS's infrastructure. Supporters called it bold and necessary, arguing that true independence could only be achieved by cutting ties with Western-dominated institutions. And now, here was the proof. The passport was real. The AES bloc was functioning. This was not just rhetoric, it was action. But why did Traoré choose to make this moment so public? Why did he hold up the passport like a trophy, rather than just quietly issuing it to citizens? To understand that, we have to go deeper into the power of symbolism. Passports are meant to be simple. They tell the world who you are and where you belong. But some passports carry more than just an identity. They carry a history, a struggle, and a declaration of who controls the future. That is what makes the AES passport different. It is not just a document, it is a political weapon. It says, we are no longer under ECOWAS control. We are building something new. For decades, African nations have used passports and financial systems created under colonial influence. Even after independence, many countries still relied on frameworks built by their former colonizers. The West African CFA franc, for example, is still controlled by France, even though it is used in African nations. This is where Traoré's move becomes so significant. He is not just replacing a passport, he is rejecting an entire system of control. The AES passport is a first step toward full sovereignty, where Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are no longer dependent on ECOWAS, France, or Western-backed institutions. But why does a passport matter so much? Because identity is power. Colonial rulers understood this well. When European nations carved up Africa, they didn't just divide land, they divided people's sense of belonging. They created artificial borders that forced different ethnic groups into the same countries while separating others who had been united for centuries. Even after gaining independence, many African nations still operated under systems built to keep them weak and divided. That's why Burkina Faso's move is so bold. The AES passport is a statement that West Africa can unite on its terms. It is an invitation for other African nations to consider breaking free from imposed structures. But bold moves always invite resistance. The West and its allies in ECOWAS were not going to simply accept this shift without a response. We will talk about that later in the video. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. So, Traoré could have quietly issued the passport, distributing it to citizens without much fanfare. But he knew that wouldn't be enough. If Burkina Faso was truly going to break free from ECOWAS, the people had to believe in the change. This is where the power of imagery comes in. Some of the most powerful moments in history were defined not just by words, but by actions captured in photographs. Think of Nelson Mandela walking free from prison after 27 years. Think of Gaddafi holding up the Green Book, declaring Libya's independence from Western financial systems. Think of Patrice Lumumba, speaking defiantly before Belgian officials, refusing to let Congo's colonizers rewrite history. Traoré understood that a single image could change everything. That is why he made sure the world saw him holding the passport high, in a moment carefully designed to show strength, confidence, and defiance. But who was he specifically trying to send the message to? Perhaps the most overlooked but most crucial audience for Traoré's display was Africa's youth. This was not a message designed solely for diplomats, governments, or the elite. It was an image meant to be embedded in the minds of millions of young Africans who will shape the future of the continent. For decades, African youth have grown up in systems where their nations are often seen as dependent, struggling, or unable to chart their destiny without external influence. The global narrative has been one where Africa is portrayed as a place of instability, reliant on foreign intervention for progress. This has had a deep psychological impact, making many young Africans believe that breaking away from Western-backed institutions is not realistic. By raising the AES passport, Traoré was directly challenging this mindset. He was telling young people in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and beyond that their country is not weak. It is capable of building its systems. This moment was designed to be imprinted in history books, classroom discussions, and university debates. Years from now, students in Africa may look back at this as a turning point, a moment that reshaped their expectations of what is possible for their nations. The message to African youth was clear. This is your era of self-determination. Do not let anyone tell you that Africa must always be dependent on external powers. Beyond geopolitics and diplomacy, there was a financial dimension to this message that many observers initially overlooked. Western-controlled financial institutions, including the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and French banking networks that manage the CFA franc, have long maintained an economic chokehold on African nations. Politically independent countries still find themselves economically entangled in debt structures, foreign-controlled central banks, and currency agreements that limit their financial sovereignty. The introduction of the AES passport signaled that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger were not just separating from ECOWAS. They were laying the groundwork for full economic self-sufficiency. The passport was a warning shot to the financial institutions that have long dictated Africa's economic fate. It suggested that if West African nations could build their travel infrastructure, they could also build their banking systems, currencies, and trade networks, ones that are not tied to Western financial oversight. This was a bold economic message to institutions in Paris, London, and Washington that they no longer have control over how Africa moves. By holding up the AES passport, Traoré was hinting at a much larger shift to come, one that could disrupt the financial dependency that Western institutions have relied on for decades. Apart from this, it is a message to the intelligence networks that have long manipulated African politics. If there is one force that hates unpredictability, it is Western intelligence agencies. The CIA, French DGSE, British MI6, and other covert organizations have played major roles in shaping African leadership for decades, either by supporting friendly regimes or destabilizing governments that threaten Western interests. Historically, whenever African leaders have attempted to assert too much independence, they have found themselves facing internal sabotage, coups, or mysterious political upheavals. The assassinations of Patrice Lumumba in Congo, Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, and Muammar Gaddafi in Libya all followed a similar pattern. Leaders who rejected Western control were systematically removed. By making the AES passport a public event, Traoré was sending a message that he was fully aware of how these intelligence networks operate. He was telling them, "We are not afraid." This was a preemptive strike against covert attempts to undermine the AES alliance. By turning the passport unveiling into a widely broadcasted global event, Traoré was ensuring that any attempt to sabotage AES nations would now carry massive political consequences. He was making it clear to intelligence agencies that any effort to destabilize Burkina Faso, Mali, or Niger would not be seen as internal unrest. It would be seen as a direct attack on an emerging African alliance. But sending a message to them was not enough. There was a need to send a message to the African leaders as well. The traditional leaders, chiefs, and elders still wield immense influence over communities across the Sahel. These figures have often been bypassed or ignored by modern political institutions, but their support remains crucial for any government that wants to maintain long-term legitimacy. By introducing the AES passport, Traoré was sending a cultural and historical message. He was telling traditional leaders that the Sahel was reclaiming its identity, one that was stolen through colonialism and weakened by decades of Western interference. Long before European borders were drawn, the regions of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger were part of ancient empires like the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, and the Mossi Kingdoms. These civilizations had their laws, their systems of governance, and their trade routes that functioned without foreign control. The AES passport was more than just a travel document. It was a symbol that the Sahel was returning to its natural state of interconnectedness, outside of Western-imposed structures like ECOWAS. By framing the AES as a restoration of cultural and historical unity, Traoré was ensuring that traditional African leadership structures would support this transition, giving it long-term stability. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré raised that passport, he was speaking to multiple audiences at once. He was telling African youth that the future was theirs to shape. He was warning Western financial institutions that economic independence was coming. He was putting Western intelligence agencies on notice, making it clear that any sabotage would be met with resistance. And he was reassuring traditional African leaders that this was not just a political shift, but a return to African self-governance. The AES passport was not just a document, it was a declaration. And the world had no choice but to listen. But how would the world react to this moment? Would it be celebrated, feared, ignored? The answer was swift. Inside Burkina Faso, there was an immediate explosion of support. Social media was flooded with images of Traoré, with citizens calling him a hero, a revolutionary, a leader finally standing up for African independence. In Mali and Niger, the excitement was just as high. Citizens in these countries, who had also rejected ECOWAS, saw this as proof that their governments were on the right path. The AES alliance was no longer just an idea, it was becoming a reality. But in Western capitals, there was concern and skepticism. French media downplayed the event, calling it a symbolic but risky move. Western analysts questioned whether the AES passport would gain international recognition. Some even predicted that ECOWAS would retaliate, finding ways to pressure AES nations into submission. So, would this move succeed? Or would Burkina Faso face economic and political backlash for daring to stand on its own? Breaking free from ECOWAS and introducing the AES passport was a monumental step toward sovereignty. But history tells us that when African nations attempt to chart an independent path, they often face consequences, not from their people, but from the global powers that have long benefited from their dependency. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have essentially declared war on the old system, and that system is not going to sit back and allow them to succeed without a fight. The real question is, what kind of retaliation will come? And can Burkina Faso withstand the pressure? While ECOWAS remained publicly silent on the unveiling of the AES passport, that silence does not mean they are powerless. The bloc still has several economic, political, and legal tools at its disposal that it could use to try to make life difficult for Burkina Faso and its AES allies. The first and most immediate response could be regional travel restrictions. ECOWAS could instruct its member states to refuse recognition of the AES passport, meaning Burkinabés would no longer have easy access to trade, work, or travel opportunities in West Africa. Another powerful weapon ECOWAS could use is financial isolation. Even though Burkina Faso has rejected ECOWAS leadership, many of its banks and businesses still rely on ECOWAS-regulated financial transactions. The bloc could try to block financial transfers, make it harder for businesses to operate across borders, or pressure companies to cut ties with AES nations. But the real fear is whether ECOWAS would consider military intervention. The bloc has a history of using force when it believes its authority is being challenged. Just look at its past interventions in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia. While direct military intervention seems unlikely for now, pressure could mount if AES nations continue to expand their influence. While ECOWAS can create regional difficulties, the real economic stranglehold comes from Europe, particularly France and the European Union. France still has a major influence over West African trade, currency systems, and investment opportunities. If Paris wants to punish Burkina Faso, it could pressure French companies to cut business ties, freeze financial assets held in European banks, or restrict trade access to European markets. One of the biggest risks for Burkina Faso is its dependence on foreign exports and infrastructure investment. The EU could limit access to international credit, reduce development aid, or make it harder for Burkina Faso to buy essential goods from European suppliers. Even more concerning is the potential weaponization of the West African CFA franc, which is still used by many nations in the region. Even though Burkina Faso is moving toward economic independence, its banking system is still tied to the CFA francs network, which is ultimately controlled by the French treasury. If France decides to manipulate currency values, freeze international transactions, or impose financial sanctions, it could create severe economic hardships for Burkina Faso's businesses and financial sector. Beyond economic sanctions and financial restrictions, there is another more dangerous way that Burkina Faso could face backlash: covert political interference. The West, particularly France and the United States, has a long history of using non-military tactics to destabilize African governments that reject Western influence. One of the most common methods is economic sabotage, where Western financial institutions quietly restrict access to loans, inflate debt burdens, or manipulate currency values to create economic crises. This often leads to internal unrest, inflation, and public frustration, which in turn weakens the government's support. Another classic strategy is engineering political opposition. Western intelligence agencies have been known to fund opposition groups, create media narratives that turn public opinion against leaders, or secretly support political figures who are willing to restore Western-friendly policies. If France or the EU feels that Burkina Faso's independence is threatening their interests, they could use these tactics to pressure the government from within. And then, there is the most extreme possibility: military coups. Burkina Faso is no stranger to military takeovers, and history has shown that African leaders who challenge Western dominance often find themselves removed from power under mysterious circumstances. With all these threats looming, the question remains: can Burkina Faso withstand the inevitable backlash? The answer depends on how well the AES bloc can prepare for the coming economic and political battles. If Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger can build stronger economic and military ties with Russia, China, and BRICS nations, they could offset some of the economic damage caused by Western retaliation. Already, China has signaled interest in supporting Burkina Faso's infrastructure and trade, while Russia has increased military cooperation. If Burkina Faso wants to escape Western economic control, it must fully transition away from the CFA franc, create its central banking system, and establish new trade agreements outside of ECOWAS. This will not be easy, but it is necessary for true sovereignty. If the West tries to stir up opposition or encourage a coup, Traoré must ensure that his government remains unified. his military is loyal, and his people are fully behind him. Without strong internal support, Burkina Faso could become vulnerable to external manipulation. If Burkina Faso survives this backlash and proves that it can function without ECOWAS or Western support, it could inspire more African nations to take the same path. But if it struggles, if economic hardships create instability, or if political opposition begins to rise, the West will use that as evidence that African nations cannot survive without their control. This is more than just a test for Burkina Faso. This is a test for all of Africa. If the AES succeeds, it could mark the beginning of a new African order, one where the continent finally takes full control of its destiny. Would the West try to sabotage the AES? Would ECOWAS launch a counterattack, politically or economically? Let us know in the comments section. Will this moment inspire more African nations to break free? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.